I'll make a thing like Celeste's. This is November. What is today?
Welcome, folks. Welcome to our next workshop. Showing just below me is Matty Stratton, my boss, who's going to be leading the workshop. My name's Tibbs. I'm going to vanish in a moment and handle the chat. So I shall leave you.
Amazing. Are we live? We are live. We are live doing YouTube things, and now I can mute that. Okay. Cool. Is it not? Hi from Tibbs. Hi, Tibbs. There we go. So yeah, welcome. We are today's developer workshop, hands-on workshop, is about configuring your app and data for continuous delivery with Netlify. We'll take a couple minutes as people start to come in, but what I would love is, thanks Sebi for telling me I'm live. I got it. I'm in. Hacker voice. As we're getting started, I think it would be awesome to kind of hear. It's two questions if you want to answer. So one is just let us know like where you are watching from, and what if you've ever done anything with continuous delivery before. Like where did you first hear about continuous delivery? I'd love to hear the history of that. I will tell a story about how I first heard about continuous delivery in a couple slides. A little bit of Maddie lore, but as we kind of get ready to get started, by the way, I am so I can participate. I guess I could type in the chat. So I am joining you from Chicago, where a bunch of we had some snow the other day. A bunch of it is melted now. It's just cold, but as we're getting ready, and then I will do a little bit of a promo. We shouldn't talk about. We have another workshop at the same time next week. We'll be talking about using Apache Kafka with Python, and I'm also going to be leading that workshop. So hopefully you enjoyed this one and you want to come back for that one. I think we can probably get started in just one more second. We'll kind of see as people are joining in. The downside, and I'm sorry if you're joining and this was the reason you wanted to join, but because I'm using my green screen behind me, that means that you can't see my dogs, which is really why everybody is joining these. So maybe a little bit later, I will get one of them to come sit on my lap, and then you can meet one of my dogs, Moxie and Cody, who are super experts on continuous delivery and Netlify and all sorts of things like that. All right, well, I think we're in a good shape. We're going to go ahead and get started. We've got a lot of stuff to cover, and we don't want to take up any more time as we wait for people to join. So let me get myself queued up to, there we go. And let's do it to it. All right, so we're going to talk real quick about what we're going to cover today, what today is going to look like. So we're going to talk briefly at the beginning a little bit about, what is continuous delivery? What is the reason that it exists? And cool. Okay, I just had to check something real quick. I'm doing this live, as they would say. It's a live workshop. All right, awesome. I'll tell you what that was about. Anyway, we're going to talk about what is continuous delivery and what is continuous deployment, because these two things, lovely, lovely things that have the exact same acronym and they're slightly different. We're going to talk very quickly about like what is Netlify and what is Aiven, because those are two of the platforms that we're going to use in our workshop today for our application that we're delivering or deploying. We're going to create the data services that our application uses. We're going to configure its deployment. And then we're going to see how when we make a change to the application, because things constantly change, we're going to see how it changes. And we're going to take things to another level even. There's a little bit of a surprise. So stick around. And then we're just going to recap it, because that was real important for me to keep that on the agenda. All right. So when we talk about what is continuous delivery. So continuous delivery, if we kind of look at our environments, we sort of say we have a test environment, we have a development environment where we're doing our work, we're creating things, we're writing our application. That's where things start. We tend to go into, then we have a test, and then eventually it goes to prod. And so in continuous delivery, we're moving from level to level, but you'll see there's this stop that happens after test. So one of the key ideas in continuous delivery, among other things, is first of all, is the way that we deploy our application, the way that we configure, the way that our application is rolled out is the same from environment to environment. And this is, if we, some ways we think back to the olden days, maybe it's not the olden days, maybe people still sometimes do this, but if I put on my old hat of when I was a sysadmin, if we wanted to, every time we were deploying, we'd say, okay, cool. So the developers, they built their stuff and then they kind of gave me a migration instructions document. We would sit there and we're like, okay, well, when it's in the test environment, we deploy it this way. We copy these files over there. Maybe I FTP them up. Maybe I copy them. I go edit this file. I do this thing. I do this thing. But then when we deploy it to production, we do it a different way. And the problem among other things, is it means every time things are slightly different. So one of the key principles of continuous delivery is our deployment happens the same, because what that means is that we're testing our deployment every time as well. So when it comes time to deploy to production, it's not a big deal, but the key part of it is that, so if you sort of look at it, those arrows, so like the dev to test, that just sort of happens automatically. If automatic tests pass, then it just will happen. And you could have more environments than just test. You might have a performance environment, whatever, that's fine. But then before it goes to production, there's a decision. So this is a business, right? Someone's saying, yes, it's time to deploy this new code, but it's assuming that everything before it was fine. Then if you say continuous deployment, which is slightly different, and it would be awesome if it started with a different letter, in that case, that business decision goes away. We're saying if everything passes, if the lights are green and the trap is clean on each test that goes through our automation, sure, ship that thing. It just goes directly to production as soon as everything is past its test. And there's no individual manual involvement. So really, this is fundamentally the big difference right here. This, hey, is it okay? Step before prod. A key idea, though, is that it only happens there. You don't need to have these manual checks as you go from integration to UAT, whatever, however many steps you have, which fortunately we tend to not have as many as we used to back in kind of the olden days. And then really this came from this idea of continuous delivery when we talk about the history a little bit. Like this is just like Tibbs put in the chat. So this book by Jez Humble and Dave Farley, Continuous Delivery, which was published in 2009, which if we want to dust off some DevOps history, 2009 was an inflection point year. A lot of interesting things happened in 2009. This book was published, and this book is still relevant today. You should absolutely check it out. Some of the technical implementation details might be a little bit different. It might take you down a memory lane, but the principles fundamentally still apply. So this book was written there at the same time in 2009 is when Gary Gruber at HP wrote a book about large-scale agile deployment, which was about DevOps. We just didn't know to call it that then. And 2009 is also when the very first DevOps days happened in Ghent. So 2009 is when John Allspaw gave his famous talk at Velocity, which was 10 deploys a day. So a lot of stuff happened. 2009 was a big year. But of all those things, like the continuous delivery book is the thing that people still talk about today. And I will just give you my quick little say, how did I first hear about continuous delivery? So not in 2009, but not that long after that, I was running technology operations for an internet company at .com here in Chicago. It's important. It was e-commerce, right? And I was listening to a podcast called DevOps Cafe. And they had Jez Humble on as a guest. And he was talking about continuous delivery. And I remember distinctly, it is burned into my brain. I was driving down the Eisenhower Expressway here in Chicago, listening to this podcast on my car stereo. And Jez is explaining the model of continuous delivery. And I'm sitting there saying, there is no way that would work at apartments.com, which is where I work. Blah, 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 blah. And then Jez is like, cool, they did this to deploy firmware for HP LaserJet printers. And I went, oh, okay. So that's a little bit of kind of the history piece of that. But this is where what we're doing. What we're going to be building here today is we have a Next.js application, and the principles we're using are not specific to JavaScript. They're not specific. This all applies wherever it might want to be. And we're going to say, how do we take this application that uses data as well? This is not a static site. This is not, there's data, there's live data, and we want to be able to deploy that. And we're gonna step through that. So first, I'm going to show you a little bit of the app. I'm just going to give you kind of an overview. This is what the application that we're building is. This recipe library app, and it uses Next.js. It uses Prisma, which we'll talk about in a second. It's also using Aiven on our backend to run our data services because we're using Postgres and using Redis as part of that equation here. And so the thing that is important when we take a look at our service here, when we look at our application, so what this application, fundamentally, it has a list of recipes, and we can say, hey, I want to go look at it. That's cool. It's a recipe. And I can say, like, I like that recipe. I'm going to like it. And then what's the reason we bring this in? And again, for an end user, you probably would not show all your statistics, but we're talking about why we wanted to use Redis. So we can say, like, cool, there's over 1,000 recipes in here. 6 of them are liked. And in this architecture, I'll show you in a second, we're using Redis for the caching in front of the database, which is giving us we can see, hey, what the statistics, if we turn the statistics off, if we're saying we're not going to use Redis and we make a change, we can see it takes a second or two, a little bit longer to update than we normally like. But the point is, this is what our application is going to look like. And then if we were to go back and think about that, so this is the architecture of this application, this recipe library that we're building today. So it's a Next.js app, and we sit there, okay, it's using, like we said, it's using either MySQL or Postgres. We're using an operational database. In this diagram, it's showing it with MySQL. We'll be using Postgres a little bit later today. Fundamentally doesn't change, and it's using Redis to provide its caching in front of that. So if we kind of look at two things, we're like, here, when I'm coding this thing at home on my own machine, myself or this mythical developer, Alex, we love Alex. She's pretty cool. So she's got her application. It's running on localhost on port 8080. The source code's on her machine, and she's got, MySQL or Postgres and Redis running in Docker containers for the local testing, right? That's where all this data stuff is happening. So, and then at this point, and then she pushes the code up to the source code repository, up to GitHub, which at this case is going to say, I'm going to deploy this, but I'm going to use, we're not sitting and running MySQL and Redis just in some small container. We're actually using a reliable, scalable, secure data system, which is the same thing we want out of where our application is running. So, we're familiar with the works on my machine situation. Well, we don't want to have that. And the idea is that even in our pre-production, when we're pushing it up to test, we're doing it, like we said, the same way that we are going to do it when it's time to work into production. So when this is sort of what the way that this architecture is going to look. So we've talked about a couple key services, key systems that we are going to use behind the scenes where we're going to run this. And so the first one is where our application's runtime exists, is using something called Netlify. So if you go to netlify.com/platform, you can read more about it. But fundamentally, Netlify is a place to run our application where it's decoupling the web stack into a single workflow. We have our one place where we run and we deploy, and it's an easy place to host our application. It works really great with Next.js. There's lots of other places. In this particular case, we're going to use that. But Netlify is handling the application part, the runtime, when our application is running. But we have data, right? We have all those recipes are all stored in a Postgres database. And we need to be able to say, hey, where's that database? Because it sure as heck is not going to be the Postgres sitting on my laptop running in a Docker container. I mean, we can tell stories about, how many little compact desk pros in my back life, sat under somebody's desk and they became production. We don't want that. And we also want to, so we're going to, Netlify is handling the application runtime, the place where the app is running, but where are the data systems going to come from? And in this case, we're going to use Aiven, is where we're going to host this. Aiven hosts a lot, has a lot more solutions, a lot more services besides just the two that we're using today. But really, Aiven is solving the data infrastructure part of our puzzle. So this can complement something like Netlify or wherever your app platform is, where Aiven is the trusted open source data platform for everyone. And basically, you have access to the most widely used and highest performing open source data services at your fingertips. Things like Postgres and Redis that we're going to use today. If in other ways, again, if you want to learn next week, I'm going to be teaching you about Apache Kafka, and for your event streaming pieces that come into this. And this means that these sort of critical use cases that are hard to do, like if you want to deal with cross-cloud disaster recovery, if you're doing near zero downtime Kafka maintenance, setting up high availability for your Postgres. These are very easy for you to do in one place. And in this particular case, we're going to be using actually the free tier of Aiven, which is available for MySQL, Postgres, and Redis. So it's not even going to cost you a dime. It's a great place when you're kind of building a few things out. So if you had registered earlier, we did send you, there are a couple of prerequisites to be able to, if you want to follow along and actually put your hands on your keyboard, which I highly encourage you to do. It's a great way to learn rather than just sort of watching me do it. But these are the things that you would want to have in place. I'm going to step through them. If you haven't done them already, there is a link in the chat to that Help Netlify workshop. So that's going to actually tell you all the prerequisites, which we're talking about here, and telling you how to do them. But here's what you're going to need to do to be able to do the thing that we're doing today. You need to have a GitHub account. That's just because we're using GitHub, right? You need to have Git installed and it's ready to run in a terminal window. You probably already have this. Maybe you don't. And we'll have instructions on how to get that if you don't. We also, you need an Aiven account, and we will actually step through setting up the Aiven account and in just a minute. So if you haven't done that one, you either can go ahead and use that link to sign up for an Aiven account now, but we'll do it together in just a second. You also need to have the Netlify command line tool installed. And if you have, either you can do that quite easily with an npm command, but there are other ways of installing it, which are also listed on the link to the help. And then we are going to be using this GitHub repo that Tibbs dropped into the chat, which is the Next.js no Netlify. And you need to have that forked, and you need to have that cloned down to wherever you're going to do your work today. So those are kind of the steps, the things you need to have in place. When we, and then just for example, this is when we're going to go ahead and we're going to start by setting up our Aiven services first. And we're going to set those up first so that they're ready to go, because they take a minute to spin up. It takes a second. And so we can do that first, because these are where we are going to set ourselves up for success by creating our two Aiven services. And we're going to do that first by going ahead. And I'm going to go to that link myself, and we'll say, cool. So if we go to that go.aiven.io/sign-up Netlify workshop, it's going to sit here and say, hey, cool, you want to create your free Aiven account. If you already have an Aiven account, go ahead and make sure you're logged into it. We're going to create one. You can use all sorts of different identity providers. You can use your Google account, your Microsoft account, your GitHub account. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and just sign up without any identity provider, just using email and password. My name is Maddie Stratton, and my email is at aiven.fi. And I'm going to go ahead and set myself up with a password auth, and it's going to say, cool, you need to verify your email, which I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get an email verification. No, I'm not going to show everybody all of my inbound email, but I'm going to get a link that says to activate your account. And then it's going to say, cool, you're logged in. Let's do the thing. And it's going to ask me a couple things. How do I want to use Aiven? Hey, it's personal. That's cool. What's my first project? We're just going to call it, Netlify workshop. This just needs to be unique under my account. You could call it whatever you want. You don't want to make it too long, but it's nice to give it a name that you might, kind of remember. I'm in the US. It wants to know I'm in Illinois, which I don't feel like I'm really sharing anything that you didn't already know, because I already told you that I'm in Chicago. And if you're good at US geography, you know that that's in Illinois. You put in your own information. I say, cool, awesome. And this takes me to the Aiven console. And I say, all right. So first of all, is anybody having any challenges getting their account set up? This should be pretty straightforward stuff. But let us know in the chat if you're having any issues. And we're going to go ahead now and set up our first service. So the first thing we need is our Postgres. Remember, we've got a Postgres data service and we have a Redis data service. Honestly, at this point, we could set them up in either order. We're just going to do Postgres first. So when you're looking at this list here, we're going to go ahead and say, I'm going to set up a Postgres service. And in this case, I want to use our free plan. And this is free. This is not a trial. We do have a trial. We do have a free trial that'll give you up to $300 of free usage while you're testing it. You don't need to put a credit card down to get it started. But in this case, this is the free tier is perfectly fine for the thing that we're doing today. And we'd love for it to be free forever. Now, what you're going to want to do here is we say, where do you want to have this to be running? And now Aiven runs across multiple clouds. The free plan runs on AWS, but you can pick which service region is used for your free tier. Now, in this particular case, we're going to want to use AWS US East 1. And the reason for that, because it doesn't matter where you are at this point, but Netlify's free plan, when it's deploying its functions that we're going to use, it actually also deploys those in US East 1 in AWS. So we actually want to say, hey, we probably want our data service as close as possible to the application to minimize latency. It will work if you put it in another region, but we might as well put it into US East 1 where we want it. We're going to use the free tier, and it needs a name. So I like to name things to start, PG for Postgres, and we're going to call it Netlify Workshop, for example. This is our name of that. And then we're going to say, cool, the monthly price is $0. I like that. And we're going to go ahead and create the free service. So now you'll notice right away, Aiven is telling us all the things we're going to need to know to be able to connect to that. We're going to come back to that in a second. And then we could follow through a wizard that will take us through a bunch of other settings that we're just not worried about for purposes of our workshop right now. So we'll just say, if you're in this step here, just say, go to service overview. And if I go back up here, you see it says PG Netlify Workshop. I say Netlify Workshop was the project I created, right? So if I click in that in the breadcrumb, we can say in this project, because projects can contain multiple data services, because, hey, we're going to have multiple data services. So we can see that the Postgres is spinning up, but we want to go ahead and get our Redis going as well. So the next thing you're going to do is click Create Service, and we're going to create a Redis service. And similarly, it's going to be on the free plan. We're going to put it in US East 1 because that's where everything else was. And we'll call this also Redis Netlify Workshop. Again, you can kind of call it whatever you want. You make the name too long, you might have a problem later. So, brevity is the soul of wit. And we all know that there's 3 hard problems in computer science: naming things and off by 1 errors. All right, so we're going to create our Redis service. And the same thing, if we go back to the service overview, we go take a look at our project, we can see that my 2 services are starting up, and we will come back to them in just a second. So the next thing that we need to do is we're going to take a look at if you've cloned down your repository, which this looks like this. This is the next. I've already gone and forked this, so it's under my other GitHub account here. We can see the repository that we're going to be working with, and then what I am doing, I'm going to show you my Visual Studio and my editor. I'm actually using something called Gitpod, so my editor is all in my browser. That just makes my life a little bit easier. The same principle would apply if you're using Visual Studio Code. You can use any development environment you like. You're going to need a terminal, and you're going to need something to edit your code with, right? So in this case, we're going to sit here and we're going to say, awesome. I've got my copy. This is my cloned copy of the Next.js no Netlify repo. And I've got that up here. And I also already have myself having a terminal go. And if we just want to take kind of a little bit of a tour, we don't actually care that much about how the application works. We probably should. But so this is a Next.js application. So it's using Node.js. So it's a JavaScript application, which means we have a package.json. And in our package.json file, it has all the JavaScript packages and stuff that our application is going to need. That's fun. But it also has the scripts. So these are the things that we're going to do to be able to, I'm just going to go ahead and, why can't I remember how to do word wrap in Well, it's okay. I'll deal with that in just a minute. Anyway, these are the scripts that are used for all our builds. So you can see that there's a, if you were to run dev, run this, the script that we're gonna actually run when we want to build and deploy our application is this build deploy, and you'll see it talks about. So that command, if we were to run build deploy, is going to do a Prisma generate. It's going to do the next build, which is going to do the build of our application. It's going to also run Prisma to do a migration and a deployment, and then it's going to seed the database. So what is Prisma? If we're going to sit there and we're going to say, all right, so what's the deal? So Prisma is an ORM. What Prisma is doing is giving us an abstraction in front of our database, and it's going to actually also give us the ability to run the commands that are going to do a database migration if anything has changed in the data structure, and it's going to also seed the database, which means it's going to put some data in there so we have something. So if we kind of take a look at Prisma, just for our configuration, we can say, because one of the things that's kind of cool in Prisma is that the schema of the database is also defined here inside of the ORM. So we're sitting there, we can say this is what the database is going to look like. We can see it's based on Postgres. And then it says, well, the URL is going to be an environment variable called database URL. And then, so that's going to be kind of an important piece that comes into that. And give me a second to get my thoughts back together. All right. So now we are, first of all, are there any questions? I don't see any questions in the chat. So I think we'll go ahead and move along. So what we're going to want to do is we also need to now, we've set ourselves up with an account with Aiven. That's cool. We also need to set up our Netlify account. And so if you already have a Netlify account, cool. If you don't, you're going to want to go ahead and Tibbs will drop the link in the chat, but you're going to go to app.netlify.com/signup. And I will go ahead and do this with you in just a second. Okay, cool. It's going to look like this. And so I'm going to say I want to sign up with GitHub because I already have a GitHub account. That's the easiest thing. We're going to be using GitHub. It's going to say, who do you want to be? Because I actually have a couple different GitHub users. So we're going to be Matt Stratton 1, which has this beautiful little cute picture of my dog, Moxie, as opposed to the real Matt Stratton, who has the most terrible GitHub contributor graph you've ever seen. And it's going to say, cool. So again, check along. How are we going to use Netlify? It's for work. Why not? What do we want to build? We want to build a web app. These are all, none of this fundamentally changes how you're actually using Netlify, but you know how these things go. Let's say I'm a DevOps engineer because I love that term. And I'm going to say the company is just me. Now, at this point, you can optionally name your team if this is optional. Since so we said it's a company of just me. So cool. I'm just going to say I'm going to continue to my deploy. Now, I don't want to set this up yet because we're going to configure Netlify in a different way. So I could do some awesome little easy peasy work wizards, but we're going to say skip this step for now. And this is going to bring me to my Netlify account. And it says, cool, you're set up with Netlify. If I look at sites, it's like, you don't have any sites, Maddie. What are you doing over here? So we're like, all right, cool. We can be done with that. And then we're going to go back and take a look. If we go back to our repository and our terminal, we're going to do a couple bits of configuration because now we want to configure our application so that we can deploy it to Netlify because that's where it's going to live, right? Sorry, I just lost my note. Okay, cool. So the first thing, so we're already set up. Now remember, we should already have the Netlify command line interface and Netlify CLI installed. The way to confirm that it's installed and working is if I just, wow, it's fun to type when everyone else is watching, right? So if I do Netlify -- version, this is going to tell me, it's just a check to make sure the Netlify CLI is installed and the version that I have of that, if that's interesting, cool. Netlify CLI is installed. So we know we can do Netlify things. If you don't have it installed, you could either do a brew install. If you're on a Mac, you could do the npm install if you have Node. But assuming, okay, we've got all of our pieces there. And again, when we think about our application, it's using Prisma, it's ORM. The build command is called build Netlify, and this is a general NPM target. There's nothing specific about this about Netlify. This is just how we are doing what happens when we want to deploy it wherever it's going to deploy. So in this case, the first thing that we want to do is we need to Netlify login. We need to tell the Netlify command line interface who we are and authenticate ourselves to it. So the command for that is Netlify login. Pretty exciting. And what that's going to do is it's going to pop up a new website, a new window that looks like this. And it's going to basically say, hey, do you want to authorize this? Is this cool? All right, I think it's cool. We're going to go ahead and say authorize. And then it's going to kick us back to, lets us go back. And it says, cool, you are now logged in. So if I wanted to, I could always just say Netlify at any time. If I do Netlify, who am I? It's going to tell me what it knows about who I'm logged in as, which can sometimes, nope, it's not. Sorry about that. I think it's Netlify status is what I wanted to run. And this should now come back and say, cool. And it says, you're Matt Stratton. This is all the thing. And it's like, hey, dude, you're in a directory that's not configured. Well, cool. We're going to fix that problem. And the first thing we're going to do this with a command called Netlify init. So this is going to initialize Netlify in the directory we're at to get our application ready to go. It's going to do the beginnings of that. So the first thing it's going to do, it's going to say, all right, do you want to, maybe I already have an existing site I created in Netlify. I want to connect to that. In this case, we don't, right? So we want to create and configure a new site. So we're going to pick that. Everybody do that. And it says, what team? Well, I only have the one, so that's easy enough. We'll just hit enter. What do I want to call it? So the thing about this name is it needs to be unique across like all of Netlify. So the first time you're setting it up, you probably want to let it just generate the random name. So we're just going to say enter and say, give it a random name. We can change it later. And you can see it gave it a name called Warm Jalebi, you know, with a bit of an identifier. Now it's saying, cool, well, we need to configure some GitHub for you because it uses webhooks and deploy keys to do all that stuff. So there's two ways you can do it. You can authorize with GitHub through app.net. So if you pick this option, it's going to do a similar thing to what we just did. It's going to pop open a new browser window. You authorize it to GitHub, etc. Or you can use a personal access token. And I'm going to actually do that for myself because of just how I'm set up in it doesn't work with the Gitpod thing. It just doesn't work as well to use the browser step up thing. But because what I'm going to do there, I'm going to have to type in a personal access token and you're going to see it. And that's not good OPSEC. For the moment, this is my dog, Cody. So you can all take a look at Cody while we go ahead and you on your end can absolutely do the authorize with GitHub through app.netlify.com. Go ahead and do that. And I'm going to go ahead and say, so if I, now if I switch back now that I've authorized, the next thing it's going to do is it's going to say, okay, what's the build command? What's the command that you run when you want to build the site? And now it's going to try to guess the best that it can, but it's going to be wrong. So what we're going to do is we're going to say our command is npm run build deploy. Because remember, build deploy was the name of the script that we want it to actually run. So I'm going to say you're going to run npm run build deploy. And then it's going to ask me, where is it going to find the artifacts? And the .next directory is a correct answer. That's how next works. So that's totally cool. And then finally, it's going to say, hey, there's no configuration file for Netlify here. Do you want me to make one for you? That seems like it'd be helpful. And we're like, yes, Netlify CLI. That would be very helpful. Please do that. And so it's going to add the deploy key to the GitHub repository, which means Netlify is going to be able to do it. It created and configured the GitHub notification hooks because we're going to see how it's able to talk to GitHub in our things like pull requests. And it's going to be like, cool, you are totally set up. It'll automatically deploy from pull requests and the branches. Totally fine. And even if we were to go take a look at, remember, it created this netlify.toml, and which really doesn't have a lot of information, but it says this is the command and this is the published directory. Very cool. Well, we kind of probably want to have this file. Like, so if we go take a look at our configuration, oops, sorry, I'm in the wrong. we're going to sit there. If I do a git status, I'm going to see that netlify.toml is not part of my source code repository right now. I probably want to fix that. So the first thing we're going to do is we'll do a git add of netlify.toml. We're going to add that file to the git staging. And if you think, again, if you're not as familiar with kind of how git works in your head, when we click add, what we're fundamentally doing is imagine that you have a box. The box is open. So right now the box is kind of empty. So I'm going to go ahead and by saying git add netlify.toml, I'm saying take the netlify.toml file and throw it in the box. But don't close the box. You can leave the box open. So at this point, we now have netlify.toml sitting in our open box. I can pull it out of there if I want. I can throw more stuff in there. But in this case, I'm like, you know what? That's the only thing I want to put in this box that I want to ship up to my repository. So I'm going to go ahead and close the box. I'm going to tape it up, and I'm going to do that with a commit command. So I'm going to say git commit, and I'm going to do the -m flag, which says just go ahead and just put this message on the commit. And we're going to say, what are we doing in this commit? We're adding the netlify toml. Very exciting stuff. So now if we were to say git status, we're going to see that it just says everything looks clean. Now, but that doesn't mean that our our repository in GitHub has it. It just means all the files that are currently there are present and accounted for. So now we want to actually do a git push. And this is saying, take that box and ship it up to GitHub, ship it up to the place. So it's going to go do that. And it's going to say, cool, I've published that. And then if we want to see what's going on in the Netlify world, so if we say Netlify open, this is going to go ahead and pop a window open that is going to take us to the Netlify dashboard for this site that we've just configured. And we can see even already that it tried to do the initial build when we set it up, and it's red. It failed. That kind of seems not great. I wonder why. So if we take a look at it and we look for our errors, we're actually going to see that the problem is it's saying, hey, I'm trying to talk to this database, and it's an environment variable, and it doesn't know about it. It's trying to talk to our URL that doesn't exist. So that's okay. We actually expected this to happen because Netlify, our app can't read our minds. It didn't know what that is. So we're going to go ahead and find out we're going to create these environment variables that are part of our build. So if you were to look in here, we can see there's a setting for environment variables. And right now there are no environment variables set for the site. The reason we want to use an environment variable is this is a secret. You could just say, hey, in my configuration, I'll just throw the URL, I'll just throw this information there. Well, that's like going to have passwords and all sorts of stuff like that you do not want to put in your version control system. Do not commit those to version control. So instead, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set those environment variables. So the first thing that we need to do is go back to Aiven because we want to find out. Because what we need to know is we need to know the URI of the Postgres database we want to talk to. And we also want to know the URI of the Redis database. So we're going to start with the Postgres first. So we can see my services are running. Cool, means they're ready to go. If I click on one, you can see it shows the service URI, and it's hiding. There's a password in the URI. But if I click right here, I'm just going to copy this whole thing to the clipboard. So you want to do that, and then just sort of hang out on that for a minute. And we're gonna go back to our terminal, and now we're gonna say, let's go ahead and set these environment variables. So the way that we do that is we run a Netlify env command, and we say, what do we want to do? Well, we want to set it, and the environment variable we want to set first is called database_URL, and we're gonna put that URL that we got, and we're going to put it in quotes. And yes, I know you're seeing my password right here. That's okay. I'm going to delete this service as soon as the workshop's over. So have fun for the moment, right? But whereas, again, in that example, you put that in, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to set that. It's going to take a second, and then it's going to say it was set. And then similarly, I'm going to go back to Aiven, and I'm going to go get my Redis URI. I'm going to copy that right there. I'm going to go back. I'm going to take a look here, and I'm going to run. Now I'm going to say Netlify env set. And this is actually, this environment variable is called Redis_URI, not URL. And it's going to look like this. I'm going to go ahead and set that URL, set that environment variable. And that all looks totally cool. So now if I go back to my Netlify setup, if I look back at my site overview and we're saying, well, it was failed, I'm going to actually say I want to trigger a deploy. I want to manually make a deploy happen. Because as far as Netlify is concerned, nothing actually changed. So I'm going to go ahead and trigger the deploy. I'm going to deploy the site, and we're going to let it sit and run for just 1 second. And I'm going to put myself on pause for just 1 second because I apologize. I need to go see what my dog is doing. He's making some weird noises. So.
Matty will be back in a moment. He doesn't normally take long with the dog. Whether it's the dog you saw earlier, I don't know. He has 2. If you have any questions, do please ask in the chat. If we were much more sophisticated, we'd be able to edit this out in post-production, but that's not a thing we do. So Matty was asking about when people first came across continuous deployment of things. I think it must have been 2004, 2005, I first came across the idea of doing that sort of thing. But I never worked at a company that let us do it. They all said it was much too risky. It would never work. We can't possibly actually make it safe. Mostly just we're not sure we believe that the effort is worth it, which is strange because I think nowadays it's very much a traditional way of doing things that continuous deployment is the way to go. And right, I shall disappear again.
Yes, I am. By the way, my dog is totally fine. He was just being weird, but that's sometimes how things go. So we can see there that it says that we've already gone ahead. Our application has successfully deployed. Said now back to step 1, making a clone of your repo. Oh, did you try to run it in the main repo? Yes, maybe. Or is this just a general thing that happens? Sorry, I'm just going ahead and doing one other thing. Sorry. I may or may not be setting things up for the bonus that's about to happen.
We should mention that we were pushing to main here.
Oh, yeah, that's a fair point. In this case, these first things we're just pushing directly to main. They're not to a branch, but we are going to talk about that in just 1 second. But we're going to sit there and it's going to say, cool, our application was deployed. And if you sit here and you say open production deploy, we can actually see there is our website that we deployed. The recipes are going to be showing and listing because they're in the data. If I go ahead and like them, we can see the statistics update. Everything is working perfectly fine. This is very cool. We deployed production. Yay for us. We are now DevOps engineers. But what happens when we want to change something? Because that's the thing that happens, right? So Netlify CLI, yes, yeah, that's a good point. You would not be able to, Andre says in the chat, you can't actually go ahead and authorize your Netlify CLI to my repo, so you'll have to make your own fork and clone of that. So if we come back here, now we say, well, now we want to go ahead and make a change. So now the first thing we're going to do is, while we did our initial deployment was to the main branch, totally fine, we're going to be using a pull request flow here. So we're going to want to make our change in a branch. So there's multiple ways to create new branches and switching to them in Git. And today we're just going to do Git checkout. Oops. And then we do -B, which means make a new branch. And we're going to call this branch Wonderful because everything is wonderful. It's amazing. And then it says, cool, now you're in a new branch called Wonderful. which in my case, in my prompt, which is normal, you can see that the branch name switched, so we know what branch we're in. You might have a fancier prompt. I'm using a pretty vanilla prompt here in Gitpod, but fancy prompts are fun and colorful and stuff. And then again, we can always just here and say git status. It's what's going to say, hey, you're on branch. Wonderful. Everything looks fine. You didn't do anything yet, Maddie. Cool. So we're going to want to go ahead and make our change. So if we go ahead in the in our code under the source directory, there is under pages. Sorry. Yes, we changed. My script is we changed what we're doing. It's actually going to be under source components, because what we're going to want to do is change the nav bar that goes across the top. So we're going to actually make a change that changes what this looks like up here. This is the change we're making. Again, you don't need to be a JavaScript or a Node or a Next expert to do this. Just trust us when we say we're doing a thing. So then again, we're going to go ahead and then under navbar, we're going to pull up the navbar.tsx, and we want to change it so instead of just recipes, it's going to say wonderful recipes, because everything is wonderful. So make sure your indentation is the same, because our linter and our prettifier and all those things are going to get fussy if we don't. But this, if you're careful in your typing, you should be fine. We're going to go ahead and save the file. And now if we were to say git status, it's going to be like, hey, dude, you changed this file. You didn't do anything. You didn't stage it. It's not ready to go or do anything with that. So now I'm going to say git add. And as we remember, we do, and it is the navbar.tsx. That's the file that we changed. So we put that file in the box, and now it's time to seal up the box with git commit, -m. Watch out for the spaces. Ask me how I know. And we're going to say make everything wonderful. This is a terrible commit message, by the way, because this doesn't tell me anything about what we did, but maybe some other time we'll teach a workshop on commit messages. It's not today. So cool. Now we're going to say, let's go ahead and get push. So we're going to get push. Origin is the name of our remote, which means which location. In this case, it's what repository basically are we pointing to. And then we're going to push the branch wonderful, because before we just said get push, because that implies you're on main, you want origin. If that's what you want, get push will just work. But if we're talking about a different, I also spelled origin wrong. Glad I just caught that. If we're talking about a specific remote, we're talking about a specific branch. It's going to go ahead and do a push. Now, GitHub is helpful and it says, cool, I'm assuming you probably want to create a pull request for this change that you made. So you can go ahead and click on this URL and just go right there. No, I just go ahead. Don't be fancy. Gitpod. Okay. So the first thing, don't click right away, because GitHub is trying to be smart, and it's saying you are on a fork. So if you're doing a pull request, you probably want to pull up to the upstream, to the Aiven Labs one. We actually don't want to do this here. We want to do a pull request against our own. So right now it's saying, we look at the base. The base is what you want to push it to, if you would, even though it's a pull request. What's going to be pulling this change is the base. And where are you checking it against? We're checking it against your own. So in this case, we're actually going to change it to say the base repository is yours. So change it to your particular one. And then you're going to compare, we're saying we're comparing the branch of wonderful against main inside the same repository. GitHub's going to show us the change we made. That looks proper. Cool. Make everything wonderful. If we actually wanted to follow good pull request hygiene, we could say, what does it do? This makes things wonderful. A small sentence summarizing changes. Things are so wonderful. It resolves. It does not resolve any issues. Why this way? Why do we do it this way? Because it's wonderful. Okay, whatever. All right, cool. I'm going to create my pull request. So this is where things get interesting with our deployment. So what's going to happen is, first of all, Gitpod's doing its thing. And wait, what was this thing down here? Netlify, deploy preview. So what happens? So first of all, if we were to go back and look at Netlify again, and we look at our deploys, we can see that there is a deploy preview building. So what's happening here is Netlify is building this app, but it's not pushing it into our production URL. It basically made a whole new website, a temporary website for this change, and it's deploying it to there. So we can see it chugging away, doing its thing it's supposed to do. But if we go back and we look at GitHub, we can still say it says, okay, it's pending, right? It's running its deploy preview that's going to go ahead and spin up our change. And this is really a cool and helpful feature because this lets me, when I'm reviewing the pull request and I want to see what does it do, it's actually giving me a live environment, a live running thing that's exactly what the application. This is my test environment, and it's already there built normally. So I don't have to go and say, well, let me pull this down to my local machine and let me run it there. Let me test this. The other thing is that you can and should have tests that are part of this process as well, so that not only can I see my deploy preview, if I have automated tests built in that are integration tests, functional, unit tests, anything like that are appropriate for this stage, these can also be running at this particular case. So in this case, it's saying all the checks have passed. The only check that's there is the deploy preview. And if I were to go ahead and click on details here, it's going to go ahead and it's going to say, I'm going to spin up. Okay, cool. Look at this. And you can see it says wonderful recipes. And if we just want to kind of prove my point here, I'm going to flip back over to my production URL. You can't see the URL, but this is my production one. Actually, no, it's not. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm on the wrong. Sorry, this is my production URL. I know they look the same, but it's okay. And we can say it doesn't say wonderful. So this is production. Production has not changed. This is my deploy preview. It says wonderful recipes. So and I can click in that and I'm like, cool. And I see recipes and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. It's got something was liked and it shows that, but that's production. But so I'm in my deploy preview. Let me go ahead and let me like a recipe. Cool. Well, now there's 2 liked recipes, but I'm going to go back over here and look at production and oh my God, this might be a problem. We're doing all of our testing and clicking away, but this is hitting our production database as well, which means we're testing against live data, which is fine if you're just reading it, but you might not want to write to it. You might not want to talk about this. So we make changes in one place, it's changing another environment. So we separated our application code, but our data is not. So we're using the same database for both production and testing, which is generally a bad idea. We're doing that for this workshop because we're using the free tier, and you're only in the free tier, your free plan, you can only have one of each kind of service, which isn't a problem for real use cases because the free tier is probably not where you're going to run production. So if what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you how you can use kind of some separate configurations. So if I go back to my Aiven services, if I go back under this project, you can see that I also have 2 new services that have been created. I have my Redis prod and my Postgres prod. So this is a separate database. So what we're going to want to do, though, is we need to say we have to update the environment variables so that we have a different URL for the services for prod and everything else. So the first thing I'm going to do is go and get my database URL. And I'm going to show you a different way to set environment variables besides the CLI. So I've copied my Postgres prod URL. And if I go back to my configuration in Netlify and back to those environment variables, first of all, we can see, cool, database URL. It says it's the same. Yeah, the value is that you can't, I'm not showing it to you. But if I sit there and I want to say I want to edit it, and I'm going to say different value for each deploy context. In the case of Netlify, deploy context tends to mean environment. So we could set a separate variable for production versus the deploy previews versus just any other branches, or even if I was running it locally. So we're going to say we want to actually change the value for production. So production looks a little different. And then I'm going to go do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and grab my Redis production URL. And I'm going to edit Redis URI over here. I'm going to edit it. And again, I want to have a different value. So I'm going to set production. And just for sake of argument, so you can see how that looks different. If we take a look at production versus deploy previews, you'd have to look very carefully, but you can kind of see they look a little bit different, right? So we know they're pointing to different locations. Now, again, remember, Netlify does not consider a change to a variable to be a deployment thing. So we're going to go back to our deploys and we're going to kick off a new deployment for production. We're going to deploy the site. It's going to go ahead and run. And now it's going to deploy production with that new production database. So one of the things, though, I want to think about, and we say, okay, so if we go back and look at our code, remember, let's look at that command. So, well, build deploy, we said that's cool. It's going to do the things. It's going to do the generate. It's going to do a build. It's going to do a migration. Migrations are good. But wait a minute, it's going to seed the database. So does that mean it's going to shove my test data, my startup data into that database every time that I run this in production, it's going to like reset it? That does not seem amazing. And the good part is if we take a look at how the Prisma command is set up, it is the seed.typescript, which is this is the script that runs when it runs a database seed. It's only going to do it if the database is empty. So it's only going to do a seed. We've got our check on that point. So it's only going to do a database seed if it's required because it's empty. So if we go ahead and take a look back at our build is completed. Now it's deploying, and we'll just give that a second. Okay, so we have that set up. So if I go back to, remember, this is my production database, which you can now see it actually as the liked recipes are 0 because we did do our first production deploy. I'm going to take a look at, this is my pre-production, which we can tell because it's wonderful recipes. It has 2 liked recipes. It now has 3 liked recipes. If I go back to production, it still continues to have 0 liked recipes. So we've now abstracted our data apart. So what did we learn today? So we've shown how, some of the challenges when we're trying to deploy an application securely and at scale. It's, we can't do this in that way if it's doing a lot of manual steps. We've learned how to create an Aiven for Postgres and an Aiven for Redis as our robust data backend. We've seen how to deploy our application in Netlify, and we've also learned to not test with live production data. Is kind of a thing. So we'd love to get your feedback on this workshop. If you go ahead, you can either scan that QR code or Tibbs will drop this link in the chat. You go ahead to this feedback form. Just love to hear what you think about this workshop. And also, if you are in the London area in 2 weeks, if my math is correct, on December 12th, we have an event, a free event called Aiven Live London. It's taking place at the brewery. We've got a bunch of great content. There's sessions around scaling data solutions with tiered storage, talking about image recognition at scale with Postgres, talking about change data capture, and a whole bunch of other things. We've got great speakers from Dojo, Reveneer, from Aiven as well. We'll be there. Folks from Volt and Gigamon. You can go to the link in the chat. This QR code will let you register. I would love to. I'm not going to be able to be there. Tibbs is going to be there. So maybe your real thing is go there and meet Tibbs. That seems like the best reason to go to Aiven Live London. And then just finally, thank you for being a part of this workshop. If you go to, we have a whole bunch of URLs. If you go to the first one, that'll tell you about our upcoming workshops. I mentioned this time next Wednesday, I will be back again with a workshop on using Apache Kafka with Python. Super fun. But we also have additional workshops that take place. We do these on Wednesdays. We have other workshops around OpenSearch and JavaScript, data persistence with Hibernate and other ORMs. Lots and lots of fun stuff. Love for you to be part of our community. We have our awesome forums. Sign up for our newsletter. And we have, if you're looking for all sorts of great content and great technical articles about using lots of different data systems, Kafka, OpenSearch, Postgres, MySQL, Apache Flink, all of that's found in the Aiven Developer Center. And just, thank you for being part of our workshop today. And hopefully we'll see you next week for some Kafka and Python.